You're being fined for noncompliance with HOA Landscaping Code subsection C3-9, Karen Maxwell said, waving a crumpled notice like it was a golden ticket to some kind of neighborhood dictatorship. I blinked, trying to decide whether to laugh, argue, or just let the rain-soaked absurdity of the moment carry me away. Because here's the thing, I'm not even in her HOA. Never signed up, never agreed to the rules, and definitely never gave anyone permission to pour cement into my rain drain. But Karen had done it anyway, proudly documenting it with a selfie and a smug caption about restoring visual harmony. That was 3 days ago. Last night, it rained so hard my driveway turned into a stream. And this morning, her beloved community pool had turned green, bubbling like a cursed cauldron. The kicker? Karen had no clue that her act of sabotage rerouted the entire runoff system straight into her pool's underground pump chamber. That's right. The woman who tried to punish me for a pipe just turned her neighborhood's pride and joy into a backyard septic tank. I didn't even have to touch a thing. Nature took care of it for me. 3 weeks before that moment, my life had been blissfully quiet. I live on a patch of land just outside a housing development that popped up over the last 10 years. The developers begged me to sell, offered bonuses if I joined the HOA, but I wasn't interested. I like my privacy, my garden, and the drainage system I'd built myself when I first moved in. It was designed to carry rainwater from my roof, down through an underground pipe, and out into a shallow trench near the back fence that let it slowly soak into the soil. It worked flawlessly for years, even during monsoon season. But the HOA didn't like it. Or rather, Karen didn't. Karen Maxwell became HOA President 6 months ago and immediately began her crusade for what she called community consistency. Which is HOA code for, everything must look exactly how I say it should. She tried getting me to repaint my mailbox, even though it wasn't part of the HOA's jurisdiction. She sent letters asking me to trim trees that weren't even visible from the street. But it all came to a head when she noticed the drainage trench along our shared fence line. She claimed it was unsightly and causing erosion, though it hadn't damaged a single blade of grass on her side. I invited her over to explain the engineering behind it, even printed out blueprints and water flow maps to show it posed no risk. She didn't even glance at them. Her only comment was, "It doesn't match the HOA aesthetic." That was when I knew she was beyond reason. I told her calmly that my property wasn't part of the HOA and reminded her of the legal boundary. She glared at me like I'd insulted her entire bloodline and stormed off. The next morning, while I was in town picking up supplies, she brought in a couple of workers who poured quickset cement into the opening of my drainpipe. My neighbor Alan saw the whole thing and tried to stop her, but Karen flashed a laminated HOA badge like she was with the Secret Service. When I got back, the pipe was sealed shut, and a notice of violation was stapled to the tree in my front yard. She was bold, I'll give her that. Reckless too. I thought about calling the police. I thought about ripping the cement out myself. But instead, I decided to wait. Because I knew something Karen didn't. Her house, and more importantly, the HOA pool and equipment shed, sits on the lowest part of the subdivision. My drain wasn't just a convenience. It was a pressure release for stormwater that used to flood the back end of the development before my system took the strain off the whole block. She'd just cut the pressure valve without knowing what it was. And the weather forecast said heavy rains all weekend. That night, I sat on my back porch with a beer and watched the clouds roll in. By midnight, rain poured from the sky in sheets. I could see water pooling where the trench used to drain, inching higher with every gust of wind. By dawn, it had overflowed and was cascading through the gap in the fence line, forming a new path, straight toward the HOA pump station. The next morning, I walked past Karen's house and couldn't help but notice a distinct stench in the air. Chlorine usually covers pool smells, but this was different. This was sour, earthy, rotten. I saw maintenance crews scrambling around the pool with nets, gloves, and increasingly panicked expressions. One of them gagged and ran to his truck. I overheard Karen yelling into her phone about strange discoloration and debris coming from the drains. When I returned home, I checked the camera I had installed last month when Karen first started snooping. Sure enough, it caught footage of the rain overflowing from the sealed pipe area, pouring over the hill and slithering into the corner of the HOA property. The next clip showed the pool's water slowly turning from clear to cloudy, then to a greenish-brown. I didn't even edit it. I uploaded it raw to a local community page with a simple caption, "When you block nature's drain, nature gets creative." It got over 1,000 shares in a few hours. The comments ranged from disbelief to memes of Karen photoshopped as a swamp witch. The real kicker was when someone pointed out that the pool filtration system hadn't been cleaned in years, and the backed-up pressure likely caused the system to pull water from the wrong chamber, one that hadn't been properly sealed in over a decade. I should have felt bad. I should have offered to help. But the way Karen weaponized an HOA she had no business extending onto my property? She'd brought it on herself. And karma, unlike HOA bylaws, didn't need a majority vote to strike. By evening, the pool was drained, cordoned off with caution tape, and the HOA Facebook page was on fire. Members wanted answers. They wanted refunds. Karen went live trying to explain that a rogue neighbor had caused the issue. But by then, someone had uploaded drone footage showing the very crew she hired pouring cement into my drain. The timestamp matched the day I was out. The evidence was irrefutable. Karen tried to delete the video. It was too late. And me? I just went back to my garden, rerouted a temporary overflow pipe, and waited for the next rain. Because if she thought nature was done teaching lessons, she hadn't learned the first one. The smell didn't go away. If anything, it got worse. It clung to the air like a wet towel on a heater, thick, sour, and impossible to ignore. The HOA tried to cover it up with industrial chlorine, but the resulting chemical soup only made things worse. Every day after the storm, more residents posted photos of the pool. Murky green, then brownish, then a yellow foam started to gather near the edges. Kids were told to stay away, but not before 3 of them ended up with skin rashes and had to visit urgent care. And yet, through all of it, Karen Maxwell insisted nothing was wrong. She claimed the color change was due to seasonal pollen, and assured everyone the HOA maintenance team had it under control. But the residents weren't buying it anymore. The mask had slipped, and what was underneath wasn't leadership. It was delusion mixed with arrogance. Meanwhile, I spent the next 2 days calmly documenting everything. I had a folder on my desktop titled Swamp Saga that I filled with screenshots, inspection reports, neighborhood messages, and video stills. It wasn't about revenge. At least, that's what I told myself. It was about truth, accountability, and, maybe just a little, seeing what happens when an unstoppable force like nature meets an immovable object like Karen's ego. I even made sure to set up a second outdoor camera facing the storm runoff path from multiple angles, just in case someone claimed it was fabricated footage. Because I knew this wasn't over. Not even close. On the 3rd day, a neighborhood meeting was announced at the HOA clubhouse. Mandatory attendance, the message said, though I was under no obligation to go. Still, curiosity got the better of me, and I showed up early, standing in the back corner like a quiet observer. The air in the clubhouse was thick with tension. People whispered in corners, stared down their phones, and avoided eye contact with Karen as she paced the front of the room, fidgeting with her clipboard. She started the meeting by thanking everyone for remaining calm during what she called a minor maintenance hiccup. Someone in the front row audibly scoffed. A hand shot up from the left side, Mr. Dorsey, who lived 2 houses from Karen. "How exactly is sewage in the pool a hiccup?" he asked. Karen flushed and said it wasn't sewage, just unusual sediment runoff, likely from nearby construction. I almost burst out laughing, but I bit the inside of my cheek. Then Lynn stood up. She was usually quiet, the type who brought cookies to bake sales and avoided conflict like it was contagious. But today, she held up her phone, screen facing out. This video has over 30,000 views. It shows your crew cementing that man's drain while he wasn't even home. Then it shows the rain redirecting right into the pool pump shed. Care to explain? A low murmur rippled across the room. Karen's face hardened. She started to say something about taking things out of context, but it was too late. The narrative had slipped from her control. And in a room full of angry homeowners, losing control is a death sentence. Later that night, after the meeting descended into arguments and Karen stormed out in tears, I got a call from my old friend Curtis. He worked for city utilities and owed me a favor. I asked if he could pull the original flood zone documentation from when the subdivision was first built. 2 hours later, I had what I needed. My property, being the oldest in the area, was part of the original drainage plan. The runoff path that Karen blocked was specifically marked as a designated overflow route to protect the neighborhood's lowest elevation, the one where the HOA pool now sat. Her actions hadn't just been petty, they were directly in violation of city stormwater code. The next day, I made an appointment with the city's environmental safety office and handed them everything. Photos, map, the footage. Curtis flagged the urgency, and within 24 hours, a health inspector was on site at the HOA pool. He didn't even need long. A quick water sample test and a look at the pump house had him writing citations before lunch. I wasn't there, but Lynn texted me a play-by-play. Karen had tried to talk over the inspector, waiving HOA rulebooks and citing community integrity. He shut her down with one line: "This isn't about your HOA. This is a public safety issue." News travels fast in a suburban bubble, especially when it involves possible health hazard. Parents were furious. The HOA group chat exploded with accusations. Someone posted a screenshot of Karen's messages where she called me a drain freak and admitted she blocked the pipe to teach a lesson. It was the final nail in her credibility. One by one, board members started resigning. The pool was shut down indefinitely and surrounded with bright yellow hazard tape. A cleanup estimate placed the cost at over $15,000, not including fines. And the HOA's insurance company was already whispering about denied claims due to negligent leadership. Through all this, Karen doubled down. She posted a 7-paragraph manifesto on the community board about how she had acted in the best interests of the neighborhood, and that outside forces were sabotaging the community from within. She didn't name me, but everyone knew. People started coming to my gate, not to yell, but to ask questions. What really happened? Did I know how to fix drainage problems on their side too? One elderly couple brought me a pie. Another gave me a hand-drawn thank you card from their grandkids who were disappointed they couldn't swim, but grateful they didn't get sick. And still, I hadn't touched her property. I hadn't crossed any fences, made any threats, or broken a single rule. That was what made this even sweeter. Karen had created her own disaster, fueled it with stubborn pride, and handed me the receipts. All I did was watch and record. A week later, I received an envelope from the HOA's legal team. Inside was a cease and desist letter accusing me of defamation, trespassing, and cyber harassment. I laughed out loud. Then I walked it over to my attorney, Eleanor, a real estate lawyer who had helped me keep my land out of HOA control in the first place. She read the letter, raised one eyebrow, and said, "They're bluffing. Let's bluff harder." She began drafting a counter-notice citing property rights violations, destruction of personal infrastructure, and endangerment due to rerouted runoff. If they wanted a legal fight, they were about to get one. But this time, it wasn't just about me. The rest of the community was starting to see Karen for who she really was. And whether she realized it or not, the tide was turning fast. And so was the weather. Another storm was on the horizon. One last downpour before the season ended. I looked out over the trench line near the sealed drain and smiled. Karen might have tried to bury nature under cement, but water has patience. It always finds a way back. The third storm hit harder than expected. The forecasts had warned of flash flooding, but most residents shrugged it off like any other seasonal rain. I, on the other hand, prepped the way I always did, checking my backup gutters, inspecting the yard trench, and monitoring the water levels around the sealed drain Karen's crew had ruined. I wasn't hoping for anything dramatic, but deep down I knew that if the system failed again, this storm would make it undeniable. And when it started pouring around midnight, thunder shaking the ground like distant explosions, I knew Mother Nature had chosen her moment. Around 2 in the morning, I heard the distinct sound of boots sloshing through mud. Curious, I pulled on my raincoat and headed to the back of my property with a flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness to reveal 2 HOA maintenance workers in matching reflective jackets, staring wide-eyed at the trench that now resembled a river. They didn't see me at first. I watched as they whispered frantically, one of them pointing toward the gap in the fence line where water was once again spilling downhill, straight toward the HOA pool's foundation. I made a noise on purpose, and both men nearly jumped out of their skin. "You boys out here to fix something?" I asked, smiling calmly under my hood. One of them muttered something about routine assessment, but I knew better. They were sent to inspect the flood path. Whether they were planning to plug the trench again or just monitor the disaster, I didn't care. I told them they were trespassing and that everything was being recorded. They quickly scrambled back through the fence, and I returned to my porch, watching the water flow like clockwork. By morning, the damage had worsened. The HOA pool wasn't just cloudy now, it was frothing. A combination of stormwater, backed-up sewage, and decaying organic matter had turned it into a swirling cesspool of filth. Someone's lawn chair floated upside down in the deep end. The pump shed had completely flooded, shorting out the electrical panel. Neighbors who had doubted me were now demanding immediate answers from the HOA board, but most of them had stopped responding. Karen was nowhere to be found. Her house was dark, her porch lights off. Rumor had it she'd left town for a mental health break, but the truth was simpler: she couldn't face the mess she created. Later that afternoon, I received a call from a local news reporter named Dana. She'd seen the viral footage online and wanted to run a feature on extreme HOA overreach. I agreed to speak with her, under one condition: I didn't want the story to be about me. I wanted it to focus on the consequences of ignoring environmental design, of what happens when personal vendettas override common sense. She agreed, and the interview went live 2 days later. The title read, "Rain Drain Retaliation: How One HOA Turned a Pool into a Public Hazard." The video had over 200,000 views within 48 hours. Karen's name trended locally for all the wrong reasons. The fallout was immediate. A group of parents filed a class action claim after their kids tested positive for bacterial skin infections. The city's Department of Health issued an official condemnation of the pool site and fined the HOA for environmental negligence. Insurance agents visited to assess the damage but walked away when they learned the pool had been compromised due to unauthorized structural changes. The HOA's policy didn't cover willful property modifications made without municipal approval. In other words, Karen had voided their protection with a single decision to block my drain. One night, as I was organizing the growing folder of HOA legal threats and correspondence, I received an unexpected message through the neighborhood app. It was from Lynn. She wanted to meet at the community clubhouse and show me something. I was skeptical at first, but she insisted it was important, and so I agreed. When I arrived, she met me outside with a flash drive. "You're going to want to see this," she said, handing it over without another word. I went home, plugged it in, and opened a folder labeled Board Chat Logs. What I saw made my jaw drop. Karen had been using the private HOA group chats to coordinate personal attacks, joke about making an example out of me, and even encouraged her board members to ignore any complaints coming from residents she called troublemakers. One message read, "If that guy wants to play engineer, let him build an ark." Another said, "Once the drain is gone, He'll come crawling to us for help when his yard floods. The worst one? A full message thread admitting she cemented the drain, because he embarrassed me at the last meeting and I'm tired of him acting like he's smarter than everyone else. That was it. The final piece. I called Eleanor the next morning and sent her everything. She told me we now had grounds not just for a civil suit, but for criminal trespassing and property destruction. And based on the public health aspect, the city might even get involved. They weaponize their authority, Eleanor said. This isn't just a nuisance anymore, it's criminal negligence. Meanwhile, the neighborhood had reached a boiling point. A petition was circulating to disband the current HOA board entirely. With 3 of the original 5 members already resigned and Karen in hiding, it was gaining traction fast. The pool was roped off with hazard tape, and even the community garden had flooded due to blocked drainage lines. People were furious, and I, once the odd one out, was now being asked for advice. I didn't gloat. I didn't rub it in. I just told the truth. Eventually, someone posted a screenshot of a GoFundMe Karen had set up under a pseudonym, claiming she needed help recovering from harassment by an anonymous neighbor. It didn't take long for people to piece together who it really was. The page was taken down within hours, and the comments section was locked due to a flood of angry replies. Karma was catching up quickly, and still I hadn't lifted a single finger against her. I hadn't retaliated, sabotaged, or even publicly criticized her. All I had done was defend my right to protect my land, my home, and the systems that kept it functioning. Nature had done the rest. Karen tried to block water, but water doesn't argue. It doesn't negotiate. It simply moves, reshapes, and flows. Just like truth. Just like consequence. As the sun finally broke through the clouds the next morning, I stood at the edge of my yard and watched the last remnants of storm water trickle down the reopened trench I'd cleared with my own hands. The air smelled clean again. No chlorine. No rot. Just earth and dew. And somewhere, I knew, Karen was staring at her reflection in a green, foamy pit, wondering how it had all gone so wrong. The town hall meeting was unlike anything the neighborhood had seen before. It wasn't hosted in the stuffy little HOA clubhouse this time. It was moved to the community center auditorium to accommodate the sheer number of people demanding answers. Word had spread beyond just the subdivision. Local reporters were there. A city council liaison sat in the second row with a notebook. Even a representative from the Department of Health showed up. The atmosphere buzzed with restrained anger and anticipation, like the eye of a storm that hadn't finished spinning. I sat near the back, not planning to speak but knowing full well what was coming. My folder was tucked under my arm, thick with documents, photos, legal letters, and the chat logs Lynn had provided. When Karen finally entered, it was like someone had flipped a switch. The room quieted, but it wasn't out of respect. It was tension. Palpable, razor-sharp tension. Her face was pale, her once flawless hair now pulled into a tired knot. She wore a white blouse and black slacks, clearly trying to project authority, but her hands trembled as she shuffled her notes at the front. She began with a scripted apology, something about miscommunications and overstepped responsibilities, but the audience wasn't buying it. A man near the front stood up before she finished her second sentence and held up a photo of his son with an arm rash. "Explain this," he said, voice shaking. "He was in your pool 2 days after you said it was safe." Karen stammered, tried to shift blame to the maintenance team, but the momentum was lost. Lynn stepped forward next and presented printed screenshots of the HOA group chats, the ones where Karen joked about teaching me a lesson. The crowd erupted. People shouted over each other, demanding Karen resign, questioning how she'd remained in power for so long. The moderator tried to restore order, but the flood had started, and no one could stop it. Then came the part no one expected. The city council liaison stood up and cleared her throat. She introduced herself as Marlene Brooks and announced that the city had conducted an independent investigation after the health department flagged multiple environmental violations. Her voice didn't waver. She stated plainly that the cementing of a registered stormwater runoff trench was unlawful, that it had directly led to a public health risk, and that citations were being filed against the HOA board, specifically naming Karen Maxwell as the individual who authorized the modifications. The room fell silent again, but this time the silence was stunned. Karen's mouth moved, but no words came out. Her eyes darted across the crowd, searching for someone, anyone, to back her up. But no one stood. Not even the remaining 2 board members. They looked just as shocked as everyone else. Then, from the back of the room, Eleanor stood. She introduced herself, identified me as her client, and announced that we were formally filing suit against the HOA for trespassing, property destruction, and emotional distress. She then walked to the front and handed the legal documents directly to Karen, who flinched like she'd been slapped. The click of camera shutters echoed as the press captured every moment. Karen tried to regain her footing, claiming she had no idea the drainage system was city-approved, but Curtis, who had arrived quietly and sat near the side door, raised his hand and spoke for the first time. "That's not true," he said. "I sent you the original water flow maps months ago. You signed the acknowledgement receipt." He held up the stamped copy. Karen stared at it as if she was seeing her own signature for the first time. A vote was called, not for removal, that had already begun with legal proceedings, but for the appointment of a new interim president until the audit and cleanup could be completed. To no one's surprise, Lynn was chosen. She didn't even campaign. The crowd just started chanting her name. She hesitated, then nodded quietly, promising transparency and immediate reforms. The moment the gavel came down, Karen grabbed her folder and walked out the side door, flanked by 2 men who might have been lawyers or just neighbors making sure she didn't flee in another storm of destruction. Outside, the sun had finally broken through, as if the sky itself had waited for closure. I stood quietly by the front steps, watching as small groups gathered in conversation, some still angry, others just relieved. People were finally seeing each other as neighbors again, not just adversaries stuck behind HOA rules and politics. One man walked up and shook my hand. Then another. And another. I didn't make speeches or take credit. I just said, "Glad it's over," though deep down I knew it wasn't, at least not completely. The next week brought cleanup efforts. The pool was drained a final time, stripped bare, and a hazmat crew was brought in to decontaminate the area. The garden behind the clubhouse was relocated after it was discovered that runoff from the cement job had leached into the soil. The HOA newsletter, now overseen by Lynn and a volunteer editor, published a detailed timeline of everything that had happened. For once, there were no lies, no cover-ups, just facts. Karen's house went up for sale 2 weeks later. No open house, no farewell party. She disappeared quietly, the for sale sign crooked in her overgrown front lawn. Rumors said she moved to a smaller community 2 towns over, but no one bothered to confirm it. Her legacy had crumbled along with the pool's reputation. As for me, I spent my days restoring the trench. I even made improvements, adding a natural filtration system with gravel and reeds that cleaned the water as it passed through. A few kids asked if they could do a school project on it. One elderly couple came by just to say thank you and bring a jar of homemade jam. Lynn stopped by with a city planner to officially mark the runoff path on future zoning maps, ensuring no HOA would ever touch it again. It was small, but it mattered. Just like the trench. It wasn't about the drain anymore. It hadn't been for a long time. It was about what happens when authority goes unchecked, when one person thinks rules exist for others but not for them. Karen had turned control into a weapon and used it to try to force her version of perfection onto people who didn't ask for it. But nature didn't care about power. It didn't listen to rules or bylaws. And in the end, nature had the final say. I stood by the edge of my property as another light rain began to fall, watching the water trickle into the newly reopened path, curving gently along its intended route. The trench held firm. The grass swayed softly. And for the first time in weeks, everything felt quiet again. Not the kind of quiet that follows disaster, but the kind that comes after justice. The kind that says balance has returned. The rains eventually stopped for good, at least for that season, leaving behind clean air and a neighborhood that had been rattled, reshaped, and finally reset. I walked the perimeter of my land every morning with a quiet satisfaction, not out of pride or smugness, but because I knew now that everything I'd built, everything I'd maintained, had meaning beyond the edges of my fence. What was once just a rain drain had become something symbolic, proof that purpose and planning mattered more than appearances and power plays. The trench flowed freely again, its edges lined with smooth gravel and clusters of reeds that filtered the water gently into the soil. It was functional, natural, and frankly beautiful. The city even sent a team to install a small marker near the runoff entry point, officially designating it as a critical drainage feature. It was the first time anything on my land had been publicly acknowledged for helping the community, even if most of that community had ignored or mocked it before. A few weeks after the last town meeting, Lynn invited me to a community barbecue. At first, I thought it was a trap. I'd kept a low profile for years, never attending any HOA events, always remaining the polite but distant guy who didn't follow their little rules. But this was different. There was no agenda, no flyers or sign-in sheet. It was hosted in the Central Park, with neighbors bringing their own food, their own chairs, and, most surprisingly, their own apologies. One by one, people came up to me, not just to thank me for standing up to Karen, but to acknowledge that they had let it go on for too long. That they had ignored signs. That they had silently agreed with me but never said anything until the situation turned into a viral disaster. It was strange, the way people could shift their allegiance the moment the tide changed, but I didn't hold it against them. Not really. That's human nature. We pretend to be neutral until a crisis forces us to pick a side. I just happened to be on the right one this time. During the barbecue, a group of teenagers stopped by my table and asked about the camera footage I'd recorded. They said their civics teacher was using it as part of a class on municipal responsibility and neighborhood governance. Apparently, my situation had turned into a lesson: what not to do when managing community infrastructure. I laughed and told them to take note. One of them asked if the trench would ever flood again, and I told him probably yes. Eventually. That's what water does. It tests every system eventually. But this time, the system would be ready. It was built for pressure, not appearance. That same week, I received a final notice from the city. Not a warning, but a commendation. The inspector who had originally flagged the HOA's violations wrote a personal note thanking me for maintaining a functional runoff system despite administrative interference. It was more official recognition than I'd ever expected. They didn't offer money, just acknowledgement, and that was enough. I framed it and hung it quietly in my workshop behind the tool bench. It didn't need to be seen by everyone. It just needed to exist. Karen's house sold quickly. Despite the scandal, property in our area remained valuable, and the new buyers were a young couple with 2 kids and a rescue dog. They moved in without fanfare. No HOA welcome wagon, no Karen-style neighborhood decree. They painted the shutters blue, built a wooden swing in the front yard, and even asked Lynn for a list of community events they could help with. One afternoon, the new owner walked over to my gate with a basket of lemons from their tree and said, "Hey, thanks for whatever you did. Everyone around here seems a lot happier now." I just nodded and said, "Glad you're settling in." He didn't know the full story. He didn't need to. It was better that way. With Lynn now serving as interim president, the HOA's tone shifted dramatically. She opened financial records to the public, allowed residents to vote on changes, and even suggested converting the old pump shed into a utility storage space for community use. The pool, after extensive repairs, was reopened under a new safety plan, with regular inspections and a maintenance team chosen by vote, not favoritism. The hazard tape was gone, replaced by laughter and the scent of barbecue from weekend cookouts. The pool that had once reeked of failure was now filled with kids splashing in clean, clear water. I kept my distance, but not out of spite. I just liked my space. I still lived outside the HOA, still answered to no one but the law and the land, but the hostility that once hung in the air like smoke was gone. People waved instead of glaring. They stopped to ask about my orchard, about composting, about rainwater collection. My land, once considered the stubborn edge of the neighborhood, was now looked at as something closer to a community resource. That, more than any lawsuit or viral video, felt like the real win. Eleanor eventually closed out the case. The HOA settled out of court, agreeing to pay for the trench restoration, legal fees, and a small sum for damages. It wasn't life-changing money, but it was enough to build a new shed and buy a backup generator. I sent Lynn a copy of the agreement so she could keep it on record and prevent anything similar from ever happening again. We'd all learned something, I think. Even those who pretended they hadn't. By the time summer rolled around, the grass near the trench had grown thick and lush. Birds nested in the reeds. Frogs appeared after each rain. The trench had become its own little ecosystem, alive and breathing and independent. Just like the land it ran through. I spent more time in my garden, less on neighborhood drama. Peace had returned, not just to my yard, but to my mind. One afternoon, I stood on the edge of the trench after a light rain, watching the water trickle through its winding path, clean and smooth and exactly where it was supposed to go. A kid from the new family next door stood on his tiptoes watching from his side of the fence. "It's like a mini river," he said. I nodded. Exactly. It goes where it needs to go. And that's what everything had done. The truth. The consequences. Even Karen. They all went where they needed to go. Eventually. I didn't build the trench to hurt anyone. I built it to work. And when someone tried to block it, they ended up blocking themselves. In the end, it wasn't revenge. It wasn't war. It was gravity. Unstoppable. Unavoidable. And sometimes mercifully poetic.